Hello, historians. We're back with another episode of Wisconsin statehood. How in the world did Wisconsin become a state, and what kind of happened along the way? So, we last left off with reading a little bit about the lead frontier. That was around 1815. Let's take it back a second. That was a nice little detour. But before we talked about that, we talked all about the treaties and treaty making and how that kind of impacted the Native American people. So, here's what I got for you now. Let's talk about the Black Hawk War. Oh, yeah, there was another war. So, let me share my screen with you here and we'll talk about the Black Hawk War. How did the Treaty of 1804 lead to conflict? Wow, I'm looking at that pic and I'm like, who is that? Oh my goodness, that is Black Hawk. He was a Sauk warrior and leader. What can you see in his portrait to tell you that he was already an older man by the 1830s? Well, I don't mean to be mean, Mr. Black Hawk, but it looks like you're losing your hair a little bit. It looks like he's got some wrinkles on his face too. That kind of helps me determine he's probably an older man. All right, let's take some time and read all about the Black Hawk War. How did the Treaty of 1804 lead to conflict? Ooh, we have a little cause and effect here happening, right? I can tell by that question, it's going to say, hey, this document, the Treaty of 1804, is going to have an effect. There's going to be something that is affected by the Treaty of 1804. It starts a war, right? So if I'm thinking about gathering my ideas, I want to focus on this text structure. What is the Treaty of 1804 and how did it cause the war? So it goes on to read, the Treaty of 1804 warned the Sauk people that the U.S. government expected them to move sometime in the future. By the mid-1820s, lead was pulling more and more non-Indians into the lead mining areas of Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. In 1829, the government ordered the Sauk people to leave behind their homelands and move across the Mississippi River. Black Hawk and his band of Sauk did not want to leave their village, but they did. The government promised the Sauk people that it would provide them with corn for the winter. The corn never arrived. In the summer of 1832, Black Hawk and some of his followers were angry. They thought that the treaty negotiations had been unfair. About 1,200 Sauk men, women, and children crossed the Mississippi with Black Hawk. They planned to return to their homes in Illinois. When they arrived, they found non-Indian settlers already living in their homelands and harvesting their fields. Settlers feared that Black Hawk and his people would attack them. Black Hawk saw Illinois militia troops guarding the settlers. It looks like a militia is a volunteer army. Okay. So Black Hawk saw Illinois militia troops guarding the settlers. He knew that his people were outnumbered and unprepared to fight. Unfortunately, when he sent scouts to surrender, some men in the militia killed them. Other Native Americans fired back in self-defense. The U.S. Army arrived to help the militia. What became the Black Hawk War had begun. So that's pretty heavy. I'm kind of thinking like Black Hawk and his people definitely had kind of a right to come back and say, all right, we left even though we didn't want to. You said you would bring us corn and you didn't. And he even realized he was outnumbered and went to surrender, and then that's what happened. I can definitely understand why he had this issue. So the Treaty of 1804 warned Sauk people that they had to move sometime in the future. So then in 1829, the Sauk people were ordered to leave their homelands and move across the Mississippi River. In the summer of 1832, Black Hawk and his followers got angry and they planned to return. They noticed that the Illinois militia troops were ready to fight, tried to surrender, but in that process, they actually had some people killed. So I'm noticing that cause and effect relationship here, and I'm going to ask you to write a summary below of this page, kind of similar to how I just recited it. Tell me the relationship between the Treaty of 1804 and the Black Hawk War. Pause and do that if you need to, or you can continue on. But let's talk about what happened to Black Hawk and his people. Black Hawk wanted to lead his people back across the Mississippi, but the militia blocked the way. He knew he had to avoid the lead mining district that was full of settlers. The band traveled east up the Rock River. For the next few months, Black Hawk tried to keep his band safe as the army followed them. Many Sauk people died of hunger or exhaustion. Some died in battles, like that at Wisconsin Heights. These followers of Black Hawks who survived finally reached the Mississippi at the mouth of the Bad Axe River. Black Hawk attempted to surrender again. Again, the army ignored him and kept firing on his people. Finally, as many as men, older people, women, and children tried to swim across the river, soldiers on a gunboat massacred. That means they fiercely attacked or killed many of them. Only about 150 people survived. Black Hawk himself escaped, but later surrendered. He spent several months in prison and finally returned west across the Mississippi to join other Sauk people who had resettled there. The U.S. government used the Black Hawk War as an opportunity to get land for non-Indian settlers. It pressured other Native American nations in southern Wisconsin to cede, which we know means to surrender, their lands too, whether or not they helped Black Hawk. Indian or Native American lands were now open to new settlers. Wow, that's pretty horrible. I'm curious what your thoughts are, what questions you have about this event. So we see on the map here, Black Hawk knew that he had to get his people back across the Mississippi, and this map shows their journey. You can see how his people had to travel super far east of the river, right? And we see this picture here. It's an unknown member of the militia carrying this powder horn in the Black Hawk War during the Black Hawk War during the spring and summer of 1832. The powder inside it would have been used to fire his rifle. He may have made the powder horn himself by hollowing out a cow horn. Interesting. So your activity is going to just be to kind of explain the cause and effect relationship between the Treaty of 1804 and the Black Hawk War. And then I'd love to know your thoughts on what happened to Black Hawk and his people. Do you think that what happened was fair? What were your thoughts as we read this second page? All right, that is what you need to do. We'll see you